Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of the Cannabis Tech webinar series entitled People Process Platform. This is Joshua Gilstrap. I will be introducing our three panelists here, David, Dom, and Rachel. If you're familiar with them from last week, they are an excellent trio of panelists that will go back and forth on both sides of the argument as tech applies to the cannabis industry, and David will play our referee, kind of guiding us through the process. So I will leave it to David to kick this off and start driving.
Yeah, well, this is a fun one. Last month we were talking about the tech side of the issue, and today we get to talk a little more about process. And really, it's the kind of idea is here, don't blame the tech just yet. Sometimes what's not working is because of undefined processes. It's not necessarily the tools are failing. And so we're going to explore what are the habits, what are the people, the organizational pieces that will help to avoid tech becoming something that, feels like it's been sabotaged versus really aligning. And the best way to get started is make sure we're all on the same page in terms of the terms. So really key for this conversation are going to be the difference between process and platform. And we like to think of process as think of what happens in your real world. You have different procedures and tasks. You have different roles that perform those tasks and complete those procedures. You have decision points that you follow. All of this for different aspects of your business. So you might have a sales process, you might have sub processes under those. And the platforms are going to be the systems, the tools that either you put information into or that show you visibility, give you instructions as an output. And in many cases, they also relate to things that are regulatory required, things are logistics, things that are financial. And so we're going to get this conversation started talking about kind of the background here. And Dom, you have been in cannabis a really long time. Walk us through what the history of the tech in cannabis here, kind of what happened.
Yeah, I appreciate Josh's lead in as referring to as a referee too, David, because sometimes it can really feel like a fight between process and platform.
Ready.
Yeah, and even as Rachel and I were, prepping for this, felt like a few times we needed a few referees, but ultimately these things work together, right? And so, kind of getting process, which is really a description of your physical world, the environment of the licensed operator, in comparison or conjunction with your digital platform is really core to the message of what we're looking at today. Leaving this up, even as I just kind of look at this first prompt here, David, I find it super interesting, right? As you go from left to right here, you start to see a really increased volume of platforms. When adult use first launched in Colorado in 2014, really, the backbone of everything was seed to sale, was metric and compliance. The whiteboard up here really kind of highlights a lot of the early licensed operators as they were looking at metric. A lot of times they're going to spreadsheets, but more often than not, whiteboards in an office became the default for what do I have available to sell? What's my sales process? What am I making in my compliance system? But really, I think it's interesting to kind of think about the compliance backbone as an overarching shadow to kind of how the evolution of cannabis tech has been built. It really created a standard environment for tracking plant product transfer and sale, but really was kind of the starting point for how a lot of the early cannabis tech platforms were built and designed. The 2016 was the introduction of LeafLink, cannabis wholesale marketplace, where in Colorado, the sales process was highly fragmented. There was a bunch of new brands, a bunch of new retailers. Companies were solving for how do I get exposure to, the broad cannabis place? How do I make my products available? And so, in 2017, we had the introduction of Dutchie, two really transactional records that were almost overlays of sales process on that compliance, right? Really picking up from inventory and really making that available to their buyers. As markets started to evolve and as the landscape, as new markets came online, a lot of the regulatory stack really started to adjust and modify those processes. LeafLink, understanding their data model, really orienting around wholesale orders, wholesale products and wholesale customers. You really had a wholesale and a retail version here. But as cannabis tech has begun to mature, additional technology solutions have really been introduced to simplify or modify the processes that maybe weren't accounted for in that Dutchy LeafLink days. So you had things like Distru, Cannex, and where we're at today, we've started to see the introduction of traditional non-cannabis vendors enter the space, such as Acumatica and Wherefore. Whereas in the early days, most of cannabis operators didn't have these traditional technologies available to them. We're really starting to see this introduction, and where we're at today, largely, particularly with the rise of AI technologies, a lot of the newer waves of cannabis technologies are focused on ensuring that there's a centralized reporting area for all of the customers' first party. As you so acutely described, your platform really describes an output, but now operators have this demand built up for really understanding the outputs of all of their data points, because as they try to solve, ensuring that they have the right product at the right price for the right consumer, having end-to-end visibility and the speed of technology has really picked up.
Yeah, yeah. And so then we go into those different early stages without the tech, and we think, well, let's just grab some technology. It's probably going to fix exactly what we need fixed. Tell us a little bit more about that, Dom, in terms of when the platform does and doesn't represent your process or your real world.
Yeah. A mental model that I really like on this one is really this idea of a map not necessarily representing the territory.
Mm-hmm.
What I mean by that is that the platforms themselves are really just a model of reality, oftentimes not your actual operational reality. When we think about the license types in California, manufacturers either needing a distribution license or working with a distribution partner. We've seen specifically with some large brands as they're looking at their manufacturing process, trying to get more efficient. They create this gap in their sales process, and so they default to a technology system like a wholesale platform that's really oriented around sales, and try to modify the rest of their processes around what that technology does. But as we all kind of understand, there's no real simple, easy button with technology, right? Technology is really intended to amplify your process. And so in that specific example, sat pretty close to the operator as they transitioned from a traditional cannabis ERP to a sales platform, and ultimately back, because they felt that the sales process was really disjointed. But once they got to a highly focused sales platform, they realized that all the processes that they had between how they grew the product, how they manufactured it, and then ultimately distributed it, that the platform that they switched to wasn't a territory, right? It was a map for what those models are. And one thing that I really want to leave with today is really all of the cannabis platforms today really impose a worldview that maybe isn't in touch with the processes that you have, which really leads to the abandonment of, say, what the technology was used for in the first place, and leading to kind of these non-scalable processes that from our view largely end in a spreadsheet as the one spreadsheet that rules the world. But really, tech cannot substitute for operational design, and the switching cost between platforms is really challenging.
Yeah, yeah, and I think part of that as well is this idea that those platforms that can feel like they don't represent you, your process. Well, they're not necessarily supposed to represent all of your process. There's some great solutions there. It's just realize that it's a responsibility of the organization to really come and say, we are going to think through all of our processes, and then these solutions can have great ability for us, but we can't turn it around where they're responsible to create our world. And I think one of the things here on this next slide is the idea of inputs and outputs. We think about that a lot of times in data. But if we think about it in terms of process, like you've got the wrong idea of the process you are not going to have the functionality or the flow or the organizational support. Rach, tell us about examples of when the process is being driven by the solution.
Yeah, so I think we see this quite a bit here in the world of cannabis because of what Dom just talked about the access to solutions and to tech being very scarce at the very beginning of this industry's inception. And there being also, along with that, some required technology, such as metric, that was actually required by states for companies to use. What we've seen a lot of times is a combination of two things. One is that people create a platform or a process based on the platform they're required to use. So we see a lot of processes being created based on the fact that people have to use metric, or based on the fact that they only could use QuickBooks Online, or they could only use, fill in the blank at whatever point in time in the inception of their business. Another thing that we see happening is there's oftentimes a lack of understanding what their true process is because they have so internalized that platform driven process that they aren't really paying attention to what their actual process are. So that impacts their ability to do two things. One is to pick good technology and to understand the application of the technology. And then the other one is to be able to create a structure inside of that technology that will represent the world that they're living in. A really good example of picking the wrong tool for the job because you have internalized a process or you are not understanding really what your process is was we knew a company that actually purchased a point of sale system in order to support their delivery company. Now, they had a website. They were actually able to take payments on that website through some loopholes that I won't get into the details of because it would take too much time. But they actually were taking money for an order. And they needed that order to then allocate the product, like hold the product and say that product was no longer for sale on their website. And then when they delivered the product, remove that product from their inventory and post the payment against the revenue for that product. Unfortunately, because they had bought a point of sale system doesn't actually do all of those things until the actual transition of the inventory. So you cannot disconnect the taking of money from inventory being relieved. And so what they found happened over and over again was that inventory was still on their website as for sale, even though it had already had somebody pay for it. And they started running out of product and not being able to fulfill delivery. And this was because they had chosen a tool, a point of sale system, and their model, their actual process was not point of sale. It was actually they would take an order and a payment and then they would deliver. So that's an example of choosing the wrong tool. Another example that we see is when people can't express their process inside of the system. So for example, we had a client who had purchased a purchasing module inside of their financial software that did the 3-point touch. So purchase order that goes through an approval process, operations receives it, and then once that receipt is received, it is then turned in by finance into an AP bill. And that way you can, connect all three of those pieces. The problem is that the way they had set up their system was based on kind of the QuickBooks model, an earlier model based on the tech that they had at that point. And they really were categorizing their SKUs at just the category level, just the level of revenue numbers that, what a revenue account it would map to. As a result, they couldn't put a SKU on a purchase order and they never were able to use this purchasing platform. Paid for it for about 5 years and never used it in all of that time. So again, another situation in which you're not understanding what your process actually is or how that process needs to be expressed in a software can then turn into a situation where you are not able to really express your process in the solution, and then the solution doesn't do the job for you. So it's not that the tech is not magic or the tech is not good, it's that the tech is being either misapplied or miscreated, I guess. The setup is not correct for the application that's needed.
Yeah, and I think Rach too, like you see that a ton where it's incredibly scrappy, right? The platform itself maybe not being bendable. When we were really heavy on the logistics days, the amount of times that I saw metric, a digital location being designed in order to understand the ready to ship inventory, the delivery that was coming out. It was really just a carved out space within the exact same room that was, a pre-allocated inventory that was ready to be shipped. And as much as I love maybe love's not the right word for our compliance application, the modification of that, while scrappy, ultimately becomes a process that, they have to maintain and manage both inputs and outputs out of.
Yeah, that's actually a really good example. We had a client who had created locations So again, this is another example of that kind of internalizing the process based on systems they have. So they had set up their metric in such a way that whenever product was ready to be sold, they would move it into a location inside of metric. And then they had connected metric up to another system, and that other system would actually, they directed it to look, the order management platform, to look at that specific metric location in order to see what inventory was available for sale. This all seemed like a really great idea until they started using another software to map all of their operational activities and things like that. And when that software would do the pick, pack, ship process, what it would do is it would actually break off the package tag. And so the order management software would see that new package tag as new inventory rather than seeing it as a break off of the other one because it was still in the same location. It didn't change locations. So the solution of using the location to be able to inform inventory started to become problematic because you had 100 pieces of inventory. You broke off 25 to ship out on a package tag. Now your order management software sees that you have 125 of that product because you have 100 on one tag and 25 on another, seeing only the new tag and not seeing the removal from the old tag. So again, when you start to build out your stack, sometimes the internalization of a process that you used needs to actually be looked at again in order to be able to really use it correctly. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's something that our two organizations, E2V and Michael McCumber, we support the cannabis industry. And so we have a lot of sympathy for what it's like to have limited options and then to have to adapt to different versions, maybe slightly more capable, but still limited. And so there's not a real judgment here on, hey, you don't understand how to use SKU. Well, it was really hard to be really nuanced with SKU in the past, or you guys don't really understand how to use location in a physical to technical world. Well, we really have a lot of sympathy around that, and we provide consultation and guidance. And
well, David,
really,
you hit the nail on the head there too.
Yeah.
I may have a process in my digital platform like Metric, but what happens when I get another state that has BioTrack or MJ Freeway?
Yep.
Yep.
We've been there. We've done that. So when it comes to it's really, go ahead.
Well, what we find is really interesting is a lot of times when you look at solutions that have not been oriented just for cannabis, but you look at solutions that are being used in the more traditional world, what we see is that a lot of times those solutions are actually created to support the physical process in the physical world. So a really good example is a warehouse management system that allows you to have an allocation process. So when the order comes, your inventory is in your warehouse. Every time you receive inventory or make inventory, it shows up in that warehouse. You got your zones, your bins, everything like that. And then when that product shows up there, that software, that warehouse management software, sends it to the order management platform that says this is how many we have. And then as soon as an order is placed, it comes back into the warehouse management software. It allocates that as a actual stage in the workflow, the order fulfillment workflow. And in that allocation, it actually informs the order management platform that, by the way, this product has been allocated, is no longer available for sale. We have less of it. It then allows a physical picking process. You can do wave picking, you can do order picking. There's all kinds of different options there. When that product has been picked, it isn't removed from inventory. It's actually put into a separate stage, which is a picked stage, meaning it's ready to be packed up and shipped out. And it's not until you hit shipment that all of the rest of the knock-on consequences of the manifest and so on and so forth are created, inventory, invoice, and so on and so forth. So in that kind of a situation, we see how some of the more robust platforms that were built for the traditional world actually do mirror what's happening in the physical world. But oftentimes that has not been a solution that's been available inside of cannabis, or if it has been a solution that's available in cannabis, it's not connected to the regulatory software, meaning it requires duplicate work or duplicate imports. So again, the reconsideration of what you're doing should always be tied to the real world, because that really is the way that software solutions are developed in more traditional and more robust situations.
Yeah. And so what you're describing there, Rach, is that there are solutions, either complete full stop solutions or put together like Dom was describing in that timeline. But the key here is that you have your processes defined. And if we look at the way that organizational success or failures play into that, talk us through a little bit about what's at play there.
So a lot of times what we see happening in our world, in addition to the fact that we've developed over time in the cannabis space, and so therefore access to different options were not available, and so sometimes we've had a lot of development or growth out of that. There's also the siloing that we see occur inside of cannabis companies. So a lot of times what we see is that it is the operations department that is choosing the operational software. It is the accounting department that's choosing the financial software. And yet each one of those departments actually need information from the other person's or the other department's software. And really what we need is to be able to break down those silos and have cross-departmental development of the actual software that is being used by the company. So for example, the operations team needs to know information from the financial software to understand the cost of the employees that are doing the work, the cost of the product that's coming in, things like that, whether or not they're on budget with their purchases. There's a lot around there. And then on the operational side, that software is actually needed by the financial department, accounting department, to be able to understand statisticals around business intelligence, things like that, how many pieces were created, how many pieces were moved, how many hours of work, things like that. And so really what we see is that we need to have the departments look at a process holistically from start to finish across all of the departments that are going to need the data from that when they are looking at the adoption of a system or a specific technology.
Sorry, couldn't get myself off mute, but yeah, absolutely. That's the way to tackle it. So, Dawn, let me ask you, if you're getting ready to have a process intervention to help move things along, how do you get started?
Yeah. I'm actually, David, if you don't mind going back 2 slides, I'll make fun of ourselves here for a second. This may actually be a really great example. I caught this in the lead up here, but if you look at this slide here with the image, right, you see people, technology, process, and then people with an extra P. And this is just kind of like one of these process examples of cannabis of I made a single pen. I've now put that through my platform, and then somehow that pen shows up in a point of sale or e-commerce as pens with a Z, pen with an NB in it. And so even as people that live in process and platforms day to day, you can even see how the process itself, as we prep for something like this, really can be overlooked. So going back to the process interventions that work here, David. Yeah. When we were first designing some of our initial BI reporting, we really sat with teams, and I go back to this one spreadsheet that runs the world. We worked with a client that was a multi-state operator in 2 states, and they had a 6-report, Google Sheet output that was really running their sales organization. So they're using one platform to kind of export the data, and as they started to share with us, the what it took to get there, we asked them to do just a simple time study of who in the department touches this, and then as they're touching it, how long are they spending on this on a daily, weekly, monthly process? For that specific company, in one tech platform, they realized that 7 different departments spent 50 hours a week modifying their sales performance, sales insights views that they would run in their weekly sales processes. When they expanded that and started putting salaries or hourly rates next to this, they quickly learned that they were spending about $100,000 in variable costs just to support one platform's output and to normalize and transform that. And so as we're going, really a lot of what we think about is, just those simple questions of where does it start? Where does it finish? Is it something that I'm doing daily? If it is, as we've kind of touched on in cannabis history tech, there are more solutions that are being presented now that really speed up or simplify the processes that were initially set in place as the companies grew.
Yeah. So then that just makes me think, if I'm looking at a solution that I need to put in place, and I'm really level pegging here, I'm weighing things accurately, the cost of not taking the time to map out my process and then tie it into a solution is very potentially going to be more than the cost of the solution itself, and it's going to leave me basically with sunk costs because I still don't have what I need.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. There's the opportunity costs up and down the supply chain here. And we wrote an article a couple of months ago that was titled "The Hidden Cost of Doing Business." The things that you just that person can do because they're here. Those are the ones where oftentimes when we think about the hours that are spent, oftentimes there's a more affordable way of structuring the data or getting to that insight.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of times what we see is the death by a thousand cuts in this way, which is that instead of looking really reevaluating what it's taking to do it from a holistic perspective, we see people looking at just the cost of the technology alone. And I think what you're talking about here, Dom, is so important because in your mind, you say, well, this person's salary is blank, and that's going to be the cost for them for this year. And there we go, we're done. But every single hour that they spend doing something that should be able to be supported through your technology, if it is correctly set up, if it reflects the true processes of your business, and so on and so forth, is an hour that they have not spent doing the work that you hired them for. And then in order to scale, you actually have to hire another person, and another person is a more expensive thing. And so again, coming back and taking a look at your processes and if your processes are being represented and what it would take to represent your true process, and does the solutions you have, are they appropriate for the processes you're doing? Do you have a POS system for a delivery company, so to speak, kind of a thing? Is really an important first step. And I think, like we've talked about before, and like you spoke about at the beginning of this, the best way to really reconcile this is to reconcile to the real world. So instead of looking and saying, can this platform do the process that I do right now? Start with, is the process that I do right now the physical process, a representative of the physical process, or am I doing workarounds that have just become part of how we do business, and we just do it that way because that's what we've always done? And I think that's a really good place to start to be able to define some of those pain points.
Yeah, and as as somebody that is, thinks about, just education and solutions. When I started out my career at Dell in finance years ago, I got sat down by an early executive that, explained the principle of 5 whys. The 5 whys is, a simple heuristic that indicates if you ask yourself a sequence of 5 whys, you can typically get to the root cause of, process or platform. So when I think about that, it's, why does my inventory show up this way in e-commerce? Well, because when it gets to, point of sale, the buyer is the one responsible for checking in at the point of sale. Okay, well, why is the buyer responsible for this way? And so the sequence of asking yourselves those 5 whys can really get you down to the root cause and simplify the evaluation of, is it a platform specific issue, or does my process maybe need to modify because I've grown?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I love that technique. I think it's fun. It's fantastic. It's one of those then what kind of thing, but it really drives down to the why, which is right in the middle of everything we do. The what and the how kind of flow from it. Well, I really appreciate the conversation here, the ideas, and I think this is something that is not just for cannabis. I know in cannabis we're all trying to really find ways to address really unique problems, but a lot of those unique problems aren't really specifically unique. It's really more of, hey, how do we define our processes to make sure that the solution that we select is
and I really appreciate you doing that too today, David. We didn't necessarily need a referee. I didn't bite Rachel's ear off. I'll
next time. There's always next time.
Next time. There's always next time. They want to see the drama come back again next time.
That's right.
All right, Josh.
Well, thank you guys. I really appreciate your time. And if you want more from these 3 amazingly insightful individuals, get the cure to your St. Patty's next day hangover on March 18th and join us for a lively discussion about the hidden costs of your tech stack, where we will unpack the hidden sources of margin erosion with a functioning tech stack. Tune in until next time. Thank you all for your time.
Thanks, everyone.